have explicit examples for why that performance within this space becomes problematic because who they've exposed certain things to, and that creates a better contextualization of what's going on. That makes it easier for the 2NR to then draw out examples from your evidence in order to be able to make those various different forms of descriptions.
So should I just read less cards?
I think more description of how those cards are relating, and more a description of like what they're doing that is that, opposed to sort of just like, hey, they're visible, we're opaque, that sort of stuff. Because I think that there's some tension when you're saying they're not doing opacity in the entirety of the round. You're like, but we don't get it. Is like, if you don't get it, and if you're telling me that I don't really understand it either and what they're doing, it seems to me I'm not necessarily sure why that isn't a form of opacity. It could be a form of opacity as well. So there needs to be on the permutation a clear delineation of what constitutes the lack of opacity that they're doing. Where are those elements that are being visible? Because just saying we should do a historical analysis, I'm not sure why that in of itself reveals this specific overall overwhelming strategy versus being sort of like an individual type tactic, right? And so I think that would be that's what I'm missing on the permutation that'd be useful. And I think that the 2NR needs to go back to some of those explicit answers, because the 1NR extends the permutation, and the 2NR should be utilizing some of those 1NR arguments to be like, do not allow for that shoddy extension of the permutation to be a reason for why you suddenly believe they're opaque. My partner did an excellent job at explaining how they deploy their affirmative throughout the context of the round is not opaque, especially when they're saying we need to be visible, right? And I think that makes it harder for me to vote. Like Eli, I don't actively vote for the affirmative. I sort of think that because both of you agree that this space is already violent, I don't understand how that affirmative could be able to make it worse. So I think that them being able to do that, there's only sort of maybe a risk of making it better, or if I don't understand how it's making it better, then that's part of their strategy of opacity, which could then be the permutation. So I think it's either like I can end up voting affirmative because you make it a little bit better, or the permutation is, or if I don't understand it, then they're opaque because I don't understand then what the link differential is between those two things. So
if we just kicked like the opacity all in general somehow,
I would still want to know why they are making it worse. Like for me personally, it's difficult to get me to vote just straight on presumption, because like a small risk of them maybe making things better, especially like if this space is just already entirely in totality violent, right? How could they make that any uniquely worse, right? And so I think that you should be making arguments about how black debaters in debate have changed the way that you all have operated in order to be able to check against that violence, but only when you all don't make your strategies explicit, so that way, white kids in camp don't be like, okay, we'll take this evidence and now we'll read this as a good argument, right? That's a good example of how their positions will be co-opted by white debaters in order to be able to do that. But your strategy, or strategies that don't do that, don't participate within that same sort of process. And so then, even without an alternative, I understand how they're making it better, and there is a space for black debaters currently to find a way to navigate beyond that form of violence. But if it's just always violent, then it's always violent. I don't know how they would necessarily make it, uniquely worse. And so at that point, a risk of making it better, I don't see why why not to vote for them. So I think that retooling it from emphasizing the presumption arguments to emphasizing your co-intel co-option arguments would be an easier way to sell me on those arguments, and then giving examples help me be able to actualize that. And I think that in this debate, because you all don't do a great description of what you want to do, perhaps because part of that's the way you want to respond to this criticism, it makes it easier for you to come up with those various forms of examples. Also, like Eli, I would love an example of where historical analysis has made the situation better for black people. I think that your argument that blacks against blacks using opacity, as you give them cross-examination, is not an example of blacks using opacity against blacks, but I sort of, by their analysis, that seems like that's, whites being very explicit about what they're doing and then creating sort of forms of racism. So I think you should come up with different examples, and potentially examples within debate, because, that becomes a unique space and where you could say those things don't allow us to have the conversations that actually be fruitful for us to have. And so if debate has any potential, we need to be able to have those dialogues, to have these conversations, because we're not getting it anywhere else, because you all exist at different universities, so you all are not existing in some sort of undercommons, actively to be able to have these discussions. Debate becomes the opportunity where you could activate the ability for you to have these discussions, and they're not going to just, clash with you on that. It prevents that sort of enabling that takes place there as well.
I just want to say, I'm sorry. I just think it's really weird. Like, the more I sit on it, it's really weird to me that y'all are reading an app about the death of black men, and you don't talk about, in terms of history, right, the Million Man March that literally happened down the street yesterday, was thousands upon thousands of black men based on a call to respond to the historical conditions leaders normal, regular, everyday folk, hip hop artists, everybody, families, children, come out completely peaceful, erased from the media, but they did it anyway because it wasn't about that. It wasn't about white people knowing. They didn't do it for that attention. They did it to have a conversation, to create coalitions, to tie together the community, and to restore faith in like the possibility of change. Right? That is a very clear, very near, very recent example of the study of history and the analysis of that history in order to to inspire, but also in order to inspire them into particular strategies that were not discussed here. Is it? I don't know.
Yeah, my question was pretty much, even though, yeah, there was a clear lack of explanation, how did you evaluate like their Wilderson argument, genealogy bad versus the micropolitics good and narratives good arguments?
I don't know about that.
Well, yeah, you did. Oh, no.
Yeah, I mean, what I figured out is that, I mean, I think that there is a risk that you might be able to make this space a little bit better in being able to do that, but I would like examples there, but I don't think you do an incredibly good job of sort of, explaining examples, but I guess that would be sort of like the reason why I think, after presumption, there's a little bit of a risk there. I think that, with 2 examples about how, the histories end up being co-opted and with more analysis there, I think you probably end up losing that debate because your specific strategy of utilizing history becomes a problematic one that ends up, getting co-opted. And I think that the 1AR is really light on explanation on that point, and I think the 1AR needs to have a lot more on that because, right, like both of your speeches are, it's a pretty simplified debate by the end of this, which means that instead of just sort of like having all this downtime towards the ends of your speeches, that's your time where you could give those examples and really go into the intricacies of how it has been useful, and it could even be just useful for the two of you in the way that you two have confronted, these sort of, oppressions and how you've been able to activate your own forms of agency within debate and stuff like that. Because then you could be, you could be that, symbol. But I guess that would link into their poster child type dissad, is that you're then, championing yourselves as a poster child of this is how it's being done, but you don't necessarily make an entirely prescriptive strategy in that regards. And I think the poster child dissad is another good negative argument that could be utilized with more time explaining like what that poster child things does, right? Because there's constantly upholding of certain black debaters within the community. It's like that's the pinnacle of what black debate is. And your question, you're like when they ask, do we allow for race debates? And you're like, race debates? What are race debates, right? Whites constantly like, have this image of what a race debate is, right? And so that's how they become a poster child that creates that. And so it's like bringing it, like, I think what you're doing in cross-examination is great. I think more of that cross-examination coming into the speech creates the examples that I would need to see how those dissads actually play out, tangibly.
I know you said earlier that you don't think that this strategy should be run against the black teams. Like, what do you think is the best approach to ask this for the day?
It depends on your lit base. So like what is it that you're comfortable running? So I was coaching Stanford last year. We went for black-white binary, right? There's a white girl and it's hard to coach them in these situations. And she had an Indian partner. It's like, we can talk about brown people. That's what we got. Against whether it's ontological, social, whatever, first question cross-examination, what is black? Very difficult question to answer. The literature is not entirely sure on it. Wilderson doesn't really speak words to it, right? Is Raven-Symoné black? I would think not. But the question is, does the app defend Raven-Symoné? Right? She says she's not black. She says she's from every continent in Africa. I say, no, then go ahead. You aren't black. Does the app defend Raven-Symoné? If not, they don't defend her. That might be some offense. If they do defend Raven-Symoné, that might be some offense. Right? So I think it's more about the concepts, it is a question of the theory, but also the operational linkages within the theory. You just have to pick your place of where you want to put your offense, right? So the argument is that we need to study history. Then my question would be, what is history? Deleuze would say that their answer of what history is one-sided and based on one thing. So the idea that black men were only forced to rape, well, is that true? But if you tell the story of only black male rapists, is that true? Right? Which one is true, or all of them true, or none of them true at the same time? And why is it bad for black people to have a singular narrative of history? Right? You can't use their lit base all the time. Sometimes you have to shift. but you don't have to just use these kind of historically white authors. There's lots of black people doing lots of work to try to, like you say, steal from the academy and put that work into something valuable. So like Wilderson is post-Lacanian. I don't think anyone at like Irvine really likes Lacan that much, but they take his concepts and apply it to white people and then say that this should drive us to do particular forms of work. I think y'all just need to branch out into different literature bases and figure out what that means to you. So sometimes, if I would read Wilderson. Somebody was reading a Wilderson app, I'd be like, ontology is horrible. We don't do that. If I was F, they read something social, I'd be like, performances, social identity is horrible. If I had another team talking about black queer theory or something, I'd be like, Wilderson, can't talk about that, not useful, right? Sometimes I went for disability studies. Like, there's some black women in debate, and I was like, can't really say anything about them in particular. It was like, their app was like, what about us? And I'm like, you right, but a trigger warning would be nice, and that'll wing you out round this either. So you gotta think, you gotta duck and move. Iggy calls it the Ricky Bobby. You gotta decide, right, when you go left, when you go right. Sometimes you gotta bust something new. Sometimes you don't say anything at all. And I lost in that debate. Some they literally said nothing, and I lost because I just punched myself in the face. So it's about stepping back from just your lit. So I know, like, you got a good coaching staff, but your coaching staff can only coach you from their position. Sometimes you have to be like, these are things I'm interested in just knowing about. And a lot of what I know from debate is Wake Forest hosts. This is not a Wake plug. I'm sorry, everybody. There's like these articles on like from Bostrom and from the like Roger Saul, like a lot of people, and they're just about debate history. The more you know about debate, the more that you will have already seen these debates happen. So this debate already happened, right? I was in this debate, and then that debate happened before I was in that debate, right? The debate about like a singular narrative of history, that was Towson versus Kansas KQ. Ontological blackness versus opacity was Rutgers versus Towson, right? The debate I judged this morning, that was, what was it? The AF, which was a metaphor versus was like fiat, but not really fiat, versus negative that wanted to go for framework. Berkeley beat Louisville in 04 in the quarters on that, and it was like, you know what, we'll engage you, we'll do our stuff, but we'll just repackage it because it'll work. If the negative had known that, they could have ran their same deterrence to that, and they probably would have won, right? So it's a question of, you go to your coaches, like, I want stories. On the ride home, they need to be giving you stories. They need to be talking to you about every debate that they've seen. You need to watch all the tape that you can see. You should look at the case wiki. I used to look at every AF, every neg, whether I thought the school was coming to the tournament or not. You should know what people are running, know what people are running against each other. Where is the literature moving? What are the innovations? You be talking to your friends who are at tournaments that you're not at. Because the more information you have, the better holistic strategy you can make.
So do you just think it was like a losing strategy from the get-go?
I think opacity is always a losing strategy, but I've voted on it before. I just think it's not good, because black people can be like, we are always opaque. You don't know my motivations for this. You don't know the strategies I produce after this. You don't know what I'm doing right now. I'm not prepping on this laptop. I'm playing the revolution. Am I? Maybe not. Right? I don't like it as a strategy. I just think that your link analysis, I think wade in the water was your out in this debate to talk about why the study of history, to bring ethnographers talk about it, performance studies talk about it. Everyone talks about singing wade in the water. White historians, and they've completely destroyed the actual social value of what it meant for black people to sing that song. That was your example of the academy literally destroying black history, right, in this space.
So what if we like ran the links and not the alt?
Then you go for the critique before the alt, where you go for it doesn't solve and turn the case. The first critiques did not have alternatives. The alternative was supposed to generate uniqueness to resolve the impacts to the K. But you don't need to. You can just say that the app makes it work. So you don't need to, like when people read and reject alt, they're not really reading an alternative. They're just like, our K will turn your case or prove that your case is not ethical. They're not reading and like defending something different.
Okay. So, sorry. I'm sorry I'm asking a lot of questions, but I was just like, because in my strategy, I kind of viewed, I guess we both too viewed it in this round of something. I kind of viewed our strategy, like, my vision of the 2NR would probably would have been just like, you know, kick the alt, or whatever, and just talk about why their case is bad and why, you know, go for something like that. And I thought about the strategies like have it all there, maybe that will change all that. If we can win it, but like if not, then just like go for the piece.
You said go, yeah, I think it would have been a better version of this twin arm, not go for the alternative. I do think, or you could just be like, we've gone for this alternative, here's the impact, right? Even if we don't, we prove they don't do anything. We might not do anything here, but we have a better method with an impact. This is method versus method. Don't give them the permutation. Our method is better than the half because you don't even know what it is.
What about the phone call?
I think with Bless, I got to make a phone call, but I feel like I thought it was going to turn into something even trickier later.
Yeah.
But it was a moment for
It
like,
was supposed to, like what I was explaining earlier, I was just gonna kick all the white people out. That's what it was supposed to turn into, like this is now on the comments, so now we're gonna have a discussion we wanted to, but I'm not gonna lie, I got timid about that because that was my.
why?
I didn't really know how to embrace that argument.
You, and
No, you're right, it's simple, but I didn't know how to do it.
What you
That's why-
mean?
that's
You're
why-
6'5".
I was hoping
Get
you were
out.
going to tell me to get my ballot to Eli. When he said it before the round, I was like, oh, I hope they check in on that, because he should definitely be the one to decide this round.
Very easy. Get out now.
You're right, and that's something I'm working on, and like I agree, sitting down after the 2-0, I already knew that we lost, because I don't feel that I explained enough for him. And that's where, like what you were telling us earlier, that I need to stop going back and forth. Just sit down, look at the flow, I shallow extend everything. I didn't just like hone in on one thing. That was a strategic error. I'm just trying to get used to being two.
Oh, it's called round vision, and it takes a while. I was a really bad 2-in for a long time. Like I couldn't be like a red paper bag as a 2-in. It just requires you to, because you have to think about the round, think about where your judges are, where you are, how good do you think your partner speech was as a 2-in, you think the pressure's on you to go for the 2-NC. You also have to think about how good is the 2AR, what about the 1ER, which is something I didn't see. Is that offense, is it not defense? Can that turn into a newness question? There's a lot of questions that have to be asked before you pick your 2-R. So it's not a fault against you, it's just, it's hard to be negative.
Thanks a lot, though.
No problem.
Thanks to all the judges, I really appreciate it.
All right.
Thank you.